Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today, traveling from near and far to engage in this important conversation with us. My name is Holly. I'm a 2L here at Colorado Law and president of our Space Law Society. It is a privilege to be here today and introduce the final keynote speaker of our conference, Mr. David Goldman. Mr. David Goldman is the Vice President of Satellite Policy here at SpaceX. David brings a wealth of experience from the public and private sectors, having shaped key developments in communications and spectrum policy over the past 2 decades. Before joining SpaceX, he held several key roles across the FCC and on Capitol Hill, shaping important policies around spectrum, wireless, and public safety. Please join me in welcoming Mr. David Goldman.
Thanks so much for that. Thank you very, very much for having me. This is such a great conference. This has been really, I love seeing this. I think there really needs to be a lot more academic engagement in space law. This is such a great thing to see. I'm really excited about it. And thanks to Pat and Dale for your announcement yesterday. That really, that's amazing. I'm really excited to be here for all of this. I have to say, I think I already have had my highlight from the conference is just the number of students and young professionals who are doing space stuff now. It's really been overwhelming and really inspirational. I've tried to engage with schools before and trying to do things, and I'll meet a lot of students and I get really excited, and then I talk to them and it's like, yeah, well, this is kind of interesting, but I'm gonna go do something else. This has been kind of amazing to me, the number of people newly out of school or still in school who really want to get engaged, and it's really with a lot of new thoughts, and it's giving me hope in a way that it really is motivating me to keep going. So I really thank you so much. Let me see, I gotta keep this going. So quickly, I was asked by SpaceX to make sure I explain what Starlink is. I think that this room probably has some idea, but we operate a low Earth orbit satellite constellation that provides high speed, low latency broadband pretty much anywhere in the world. I think anywhere in the world. We're able to reach places that other technologies can't. Let me see. Thanks. Okay. We've been growing pretty quick. We have over 6 million customers around the world. We're in over 140 countries. I feel like it's every few days we're announcing another country that we're moving into. You'll see as we're going, we're starting to push more. This is a little bit old. We're starting to push more into Africa, which is actually one of the things I'm really excited about, is we're pushing more and more into Africa and Southeast Asia. That really is when you're talking about the 3 million people who still aren't connected, that's really where a lot of them are. And we're doing a lot of work right now to try to really push into those regions, which is really exciting to me because we're getting to see people who really have no other options. And you think about how many really talented, great people are out there that can't get the kind of access to education, can't start businesses with reach outside of their village. And now we're being able to get there. It's really exciting to see where this is going. All right, so I did want to start turning some of the focus from looking up to kind of looking at what's actually happening on the ground. A friend of mine at SpaceX actually is an aerospace engineer who graduated from Colorado. And she was part of our Polaris Dawn mission a few months ago, which was the first private spacewalk. They had a totally private crew. We had a few SpaceX employees on it that not only went into orbit, but actually opened up the capsule and went on a spacewalk. And one of the purposes of their mission was to raise awareness for St. Jude's. And one of the things they did was they went around the world, and one of the places they went was to the Philippines to help raise money, raise awareness, raise funding for St. Jude's. And St. Jude's, they're focused on children's cancer. And In the United States, it's an 80% survival rate for children's cancer. Outside the United States, the stats reverse. And they went down to the Philippines. One of the big issues they have in the Philippines is there's a big hospital in Manila that actually they have great researchers, doctors who are trained on what to do, but it's really hard to get around the country. And so for families who have children who have issues, it could be hours, 3, 7 hours to drive to the hospital. And there's clinics all around the country, but they don't have the same kind of resources that they do at the hospital. So one of the things that the Polaris Dawn crew did is they went down there and they brought a bunch of Starlink terminals. And they brought them out to these clinics that are the far reaches of the country. And what they were able to do is get the doctors, good doctors at these clinics, but they didn't have the same resources. And what they were able to do with the Starlink connection is that they were able to now reach back to the central hospital and anywhere in the world and be able to diagnose faster, find treatments faster, and start helping the survival rates go up. And so Sarah, who went and did this, was telling me how inspiring it was to see the people in the Philippines who had been so committed to doing this, to be able to now have new resources, new tools at their fingertips to be able to really help. So one of the things you can do when you don't have to rely on the infrastructure on the ground, when there was the LA wildfires a few months ago, and people were being affected by fires who never expected that was going to happen, the traditional connectivity all went out. And we were able to send in about 1,300 or so user terminals to public safety, first responders, to shelters, and we actually provided free service to anyone who had the kits. And it helped public safety mobilize, it helped find victims, it helped connect families for those first critical days when there just wasn't really any other option. Similarly, in Spain and Portugal, when the power went out, everything else went out. And what we saw is when everything else went out, our usage spiked. It shot up about 35%, like immediately afterwards. And what that was is that a lot of people actually had our user terminals as backup. And when they didn't have another option, they were able to turn this on and be able to connect when they had no other options. And then I personally actually recently had an experience. I got to go to Kenya, and the president of Kenya is, one of his initiatives that he's trying to do is he wants to push more government services online. A lot of the government services are very inefficient. They're hard to reach, and like his goal is to be able to put a lot more of these government services to be more accessible online. The problem is, in most of Kenya, you have a very hard time getting internet connections. So he's actually been very supportive of us trying to push Starlink out as far as we can to as many people as we can. And one of the things he asked me to do when I was there was to go meet with the head of the Parks Department. And so we drove over there and we were talking in the car, and I had no idea what I was going to talk to him about. We weren't prepared for it. But actually, we got there and he was amazing, the head of the Parks Department. He actually was prepared to present to us that last year he had bought a number of our terminals and put them on the gates of all the parks across the country. So everywhere, like if you were to go to Kenya to go on safari, this is where you would go. And so these parks are in far-flung areas of the country, really remote. There is no other kind of connectivity. And what he said, he put these terminals on the gates to every one of the parks. And so then you had Wi-Fi when you were coming in. And up until then, to get into a park, you had to pay in cash because they didn't have any connectivity. They then switched all the payment to apps that you had to download their app and you pay. Revenue to the park went up 10x. There was that much inefficiency that was going on. They were getting 10% of the potential revenue into the parks because of whatever was happening in the transaction there. But the other thing, once they had that, what they realized they could do is they started actually putting a bunch of these kits out in the parks where they have cameras where they know where the poachers are going. But they don't have connectivity to those cameras. So a ranger would actually have to go at night and pick up the memory from the cameras and see what happened. By attaching these terminals to the cameras, they were actually starting to be able to track down poachers in real time. and be able to actually stop it before it happens rather than forensically figuring out what happened afterwards. But then he told me, this is like, they're so like kind of public interest oriented. They leave all of the terminals on because there's villages all around there and they don't have anything either. So they just leave the terminals on as basically free broadband to the local communities. And he was showing me pictures of people coming out with their phones that the whole village comes around. You know, we've seen kind of in the United States of kind of people going to the McDonald's to get the Wi-Fi. This is like the whole village, there was no other option. This is how they were getting it. And so you just start thinking about like all these uses. I mean, I didn't think of it. I don't think when we were working on Starlink, these are not the kind of things that we were thinking about. And it's amazing to see when you have this new technology, what people can do with it. And so, like, I don't say all these things as like a commercial for Starlink. Well, a little bit of commercial for Starlink. But we may be the first doing a lot of this, but like, we really got to make sure we're not the last and the only, right? We need to think about how do we encourage more innovation like this? How do we use space better? How do we keep innovating? And access to space at this point it's much less expensive than it had ever been. There's more launches, there's more abilities to get to space than ever. How do we use those lower barriers of entry to actually encourage the innovation? And I think actually from where I sit, the regulations are starting to be the barrier. That's where the bottleneck is. And I'm not here to say, oh, so get rid of all the regulations. That's actually, I'm gonna say the opposite of that. But I do think we need to right-size them. I do think we need to upgrade them. A lot of the regulations are decades old. They're for when launches were happening every several years. You know, I worked in and around the FCC for a dozen years, where I actually didn't know that the FCC approved commercial launches, because in that time there was no commercial launches. Now we're going every 2 days, right? So we're just in a totally different world than from when a lot of these rules were in place. And I think we have to start thinking about how do we upgrade them? How do we start matching the regulations to the world that we live in now? So I started thinking, so from the startup summer here, what if there was a couple of students who came in and said, hey, I want to actually do a space startup. I want to see if there's a way to be able to like use this increased access to space to do like kind of create one of the startups like Startup Summer is famous for, but to do it trying to leverage space. So first, there's a couple things. One of them is, you know, if you were doing a terrestrial thing, you wouldn't, if you wanted to do an online business, for example, you wouldn't have to think of how do I trench for fiber? How do I build a tower, right? Like that's all there. For a number of reasons, the policies for space actually push you that you probably want to build your own system. I don't think you need to do that, but I do think a lot of our policies do push in that direction. And so the first thing you would have to do is start figuring out, how am I going to build and fly satellites? How am I going to start building a ground network? How am I going to build user equipment? And that's before you get to the actual business part of it. So I think that's one of the things we should be thinking about. But assuming you get that far, like what's the next step? And so I started thinking, like, what would be a potential business that could be, you know, BuffSat, that could be coming out of the startup plan? I'm assuming like one potential business is like Earth monitoring to track Dion to see recruiting. I assume there's some money in that. And so if you wanted to build a system, this is actually kind of loosely modeled off of some of our launch customers we have on some of our ride shares. You know, we launch ride shares where you can share a launch with a bunch of other small satellite operators and kind of lower the cost for anybody. And so these numbers are all kind of loosely built based on actual customers that we have. So if you wanted to do, say, 12 CubeSats, the next possible launch that you could get on is scheduled for February 27. We actually just had one of these transporters the other day where we had 70 different satellites that we launched. So you can get on at about, like there's an available spot, February 27. A few months later, you can get another one. Total launch fee is about $2 million to be able to do that. So assuming that our students call Dale and say, let's get rid of the new professor and like, you can sponsor a whole new Colorado constellation. And so Pat and Dale say that is a better legacy. Let's do that. Especially when they find out about the Dion thing. And so you're saving money, you don't put propulsion on it. I don't recommend that, but let's say that's what we do. We launch, we don't put propulsion on, so the rocket drops you off where it takes about 5 years of a passive deorbit. The licensing fees for that system probably are $250,000 more over that 5 years than your launch fee. Also, this is not, the FCC is doing really incredible stuff. The Space Bureau, Chairwoman Rosenworcel creating the Space Bureau really was a lot of foresight. I know Julie did some amazing work getting that started. I think Jay, who's there now, is really taking it and running with it. I've been super impressed with it, but they are pushing against a lot of legacy regulations and norms that make it very difficult. And so this data is a little bit old, but based off of just historical numbers of how long it takes for the FCC to process a license, you probably, if you filed today, probably don't get your license until September 27th, which means you missed your launches, right? And if you talk to a lot of space startups, you miss your launch, you run out of funding, right? You probably don't go. That's not a delay, that probably just doesn't happen. So we have to right-size this, right? It shouldn't cost more to get your license than it costs to launch. So the other thing that happens though, when you get your license is typically, at least in our experience, a lot of our customers' experience, our launch customers' experiences, the licenses tend to come very close to when you actually launch. And so you say, okay, that's fine, at least you got your license. But the thing is that these licenses come with conditions. And so you get your license, by the time you get your license, you probably had to develop, build, and actually ship your satellites to the launch site by the time you got your license. So you get the conditions on your license, and then you have to go quickly read and find out whether you actually built the thing that you're allowed to go fly. And these conditions are not trivial. I know there was some conversation yesterday about space is unregulated. These are the conditions on our last license. There was 12 pages of conditions there. It goes up, I think, to quadruple J. And by the way, that last condition in the bottom right corner says also we're importing all of the conditions from all of your other licenses too. Right, so it's fine. We have a legal team. For us, we can sit there and we can read through this and figure this out. But if you're a small business, if you're students, this is a big scramble to go figure out whether you do it. And we have launch customers. This happens where you get this, or you get questions a few weeks out. You get calls from the FCC where it's not necessarily written rules, but it's kind of FCC practice, and they call and say, well, what are you doing about this? What are you doing about that? That could be the end of the business. And you could say, okay, well, this is all boilerplate. It's actually not. We did an analysis on this. It's actually highly unpredictable which conditions you're gonna get on your license. We compared for several years worth of licenses that came out, and we were running them up against each other. I'm sure there's some reasoning between who gets what conditions, but large constellations didn't get some of the space sustainability conditions that we got, while constellations of 8 satellites did. It's just consistently like this. It's really hard to know what you're actually gonna get. So this is not trivial. So what I wanted to suggest is that we start thinking about how can we update these rules to start encouraging and lower the barrier to entry on the regulatory side to match the lower barrier to entry on cost and technology. And so one of the things is current rules, this regulation by condition it ends up being very ad hoc and very hard to predict. So if you're the students building BuffSat, you're sitting there and you're saying, okay, well, let's read the rules and figure out what do I have to build around. You can't really know in advance. You have to wait. And so you build kind of at risk and hope that it works out. So I think we need to start thinking about how do we standardize these rules, make them more predictable. Maybe people need waivers, and we can spend the time thinking about how waivers could work. But the initial set of rules, I think we need to start making it more understandable upfront and more predictable, so you know when you're building your system what rules you're building to. Engineers are really creative on how to solve problems when you tell them the limits that they're building against. But if they don't know, they sit there and they just are guessing, and it creates a massive inefficiency. So I had a few ideas that to suggest of things that we could be doing. For example, I didn't even, when I was talking about the space stuff, I didn't even get into the ground stations, right? So if you need to start setting up ground stations, each one is individually licensed. They do interference checks on all of them, even though at the frequencies that a lot of these things are operating, the chance of interference is almost nothing, especially when you push up into the higher frequencies. Mostly you just need to know where the other systems are, the other Earth stations are, and make sure that you're not piling on top of each other. And so what if we move to a light licensing model that's kind of, this does not have to be a fancy dynamic database, just a regular database kind of system where you go check is where I'm gonna build, is that gonna be on top of someone else? And if not, we're okay. So that can speed up, it'll actually help FCC processing. You know, the ground station, the gateway applications can take over a year to process on their own. So you can accelerate that dramatically. Sunsetting outdated protections. This is all shared spectrum that we operate in, mostly. And there's a lot of protections that are kind of in place to protect the initial investment. But there's gotta be a time where at some point we're starting to make it easier for new entrants to start being able to build in there too. And we actually suggested for our own license, as a matter of fact, for our initial Gen 1 system, we suggested sunsetting our own protection. I may be the first dumbest person at the FCC to go actually into the FCC and say actually sunset our own initial protections. But I think you have to. And so start looking at these incumbent protections. How do you wind them down over time? And what that does is it actually creates an incentive for both sides, the new entrants and for the incumbents, to come together and try to work and see if you could figure it out amongst yourselves, right? Because both sides at that point have an incentive. If you have the protection for some amount of time, the new entrant says, well, if I can get an agreement now, maybe I can make my situation better. And if you're the incumbent, you can say, well, if I can get a deal, like I never will have more leverage than I have now, maybe I can get a better deal by doing this today rather than waiting. And so I think by sunsetting protections, you're also driving the industry to work together to actually solve their own problems. Encourage more both infrastructure and spectrum sharing. I have them in one bullet because it both said sharing, but like these are actually kind of two different things. Infrastructure, like I said earlier, there's actually a lot of the rules push you to kind of have to develop your own integrated top to bottom system. It doesn't have to be that way. We can make it much easier on ground networks to share ground networks, right? Like right now for gateways, you actually have to apply for each and every one of your gateways for a new point of contact, new satellites you want to talk to. That means if you had, say you wanted to do gateways as a service, if you had 6 clients and 100 gateways, that's 600 applications you have to do. I think we can make it easier than that. Also, hosted payloads. Like, it's not easy to get a hosted payload approved. To be able to put your antenna on someone else's satellite, that seems like that's just good in all ways, honestly. You have fewer satellites, independent satellites that are flying. You have, if you're the students, you don't actually have to go hire aerospace engineers. You can just attach to someone else's system. Enforce deployment requirements. Accelerate harmonization is, I'm throwing a little bomb, but can we get the ITU to move a little faster, right? Like the ITU is becoming like totally irrelevant. And strong, consistent rules for sustainability. I'm sorry, I wasn't tracking my time, so I'm sorry if I'm running over. Sustainability, in particular, I think this is a place where we can, like, let's get some more strong rules in there that are predictable and it's not as much ad hoc. But we put up this picture on purpose. So the top half of the Earth there, that is from an OECD presentation of talking about space sustainability. The bottom one is actually a real picture of space from the Polaris Dawn launch. We probably have hundreds of satellites in that bottom picture, right? There are real things that need to be done on space sustainability. It's a real issue that needs to be talked about. But when you say that space looks like the top picture, when it actually looks like the bottom picture, you're not having an honest conversation about it. Now, I do want to make an exception. The picture for this is spectacular. And my understanding is this came from Peter Tenhula going to AI and saying, can you create an image of satellites the size of small continents? And then when he got the picture, he said, that's not, can you create some more dragon fire? So while I'm complaining generally, this one I am not complaining about because this is how you do it. But a lot of what needs to be done on space sustainability is actually communication. It is transparency. It's that operators are talking. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to accelerate so I don't use up all the time. But it's about transparency, working together, actually telling people where your satellites are. There's a lot that can be done just by kind of enhancing transparency and working together. It's really a problem. There are not traffic rules in space. Like, we really got to start figuring these things out. I like talking about, like, OneWeb is licensed in the UK. We're licensed in the United States. If we have two satellites coming on at each other, do you pass on the left or the right? Like, we need to really, I think, but if you can put in rules up front that people can understand, then you can build to the rules. When it comes in late and you get conditions on your license that you don't know whether you're going to get them or you're not, it's really hard to build towards it. It is not creating the right incentives. It is not, when some people get a requirement and others don't, you're pushing all those requirements onto, and all of that action onto one operator. The other operator gets a free pass. It's not creating the right incentives. It is not encouraging everyone to be as responsible as possible. So just to kind of close out, I'm not sure that all these things that I'm suggesting are the right things. Especially, like I said, I've met some incredible students, some incredible kind of young professionals here. I guess my ask is for you guys, challenge what I'm suggesting, tell me why it's wrong, but also, like, really the status quo, really challenge whether those are the right things. When you're learning this stuff, I know it's a steep learning curve, I know you're learning a lot, and it's presented as this is the way it's done. I never accept that that's right. Question whether that is what we're doing is the right thing, and whether we can do it better, because I promise you 100% of the time there's some way to do it better, and we should be looking for those ways. So anyway, that's the end of that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, all right, Andreas, you're on. Are you gonna run BuffSat now that you've heard about the idea? All right.
Right, exactly. There's money in that. People will pay.
Okay, so my name's Andreas. I'm a fourth year aerospace engineering student, and I was wondering, how is SpaceX navigating, like, the regulatory or licensing differences between Starlink and Starshield?
Yeah. Let's not do the wiser rule. No, they're actually really different because it's on the Starshield side. It's a lot of government authorization, so it runs a lot of that runs more through the NTIA side. So it actually is they really are. It's like a different licensing because it's when you're operating for the commercial, you go through the FCC and you've got all the commercial rules. For the government side, when you're going through NTIA, it's like a different. It's just a whole different process. So they're kind of parallel. We run it's similar hardware, but it's not exactly the same, and so it just gets licensed different. It's not a satisfying answer, but it's just what it is.
Good question. Let's go back to Kelsey.
Kelsey Johnson, University of Virginia. First, I really want to publicly thank on the record Starlink for being really good partners to astronomers. Of many of the satellite companies, I think Starlink has really gone above and beyond what's been required to work with us, and we really appreciate that. So I want to call that out and send some kudos your way. But I want to follow that up with maybe a little bit of a hot potato after I've softened you up and thanked you. I think the use cases you presented for Starlink are really compelling. And I think everyone in the room, including me, is on board with bridging the digital divide. Like, that's really important. In fact, it's baked into the mission statement of the American Astronomical Society and sharing things with all of humanity. So I want to express that, like, we really are supportive of that. But there's also a hidden reality here that I think PR firms are really good at hiding. And that is that the overwhelming majority of internet use is for high definition videos, a substantial fraction of which is pornography, online gaming and online shopping. And that's really where the internet use is going. And if we want to make the case that the reason we have satellites is to bridge the digital divide, I'm on board with that. But that doesn't take tens of thousands of satellites. And so I think the question is, and this is maybe for everyone in industry, to can you make an assessment if, and I realize this isn't a viable business model, and there's a reason I'm not in business, among many other things. I don't really care about money. If all you were trying to do is bridge the digital divide, how much internet would that take, and how many satellites would it take? Because I think it's far, far south of what we're predicting will happen.
Yeah, so first, thanks for the nice part. And it's true, it's, by the way, just National Science Foundation and NRIO have been just amazing, amazing partners on working on how to mitigate harm to astronomers. It's one of my favorite parts of my job is getting to work with them. It's really been incredible. This is true, I actually now bring my kids to radio astronomy sites on vacation, which they tell me they like. But I brought them to the Very Large Array recently. It's super cool for me. But yeah, so to the other, I don't have the data on what people are using internet for. I think we saw those use cases. We don't have a PR firm, by the way. Those are ours. You really do need high-speed internet, and it's not just us. We should have other systems out there. I think it's not about numbers. There's things you can do to mitigate. You can have a handful of really bad satellites. I think the focus on the number of satellites is missing the issue. You can have a handful of satellites that are too bright or too noisy or whatever, are not flown well and can be extremely risky. You can also have a bunch of satellites that are run responsibly and mitigate these problems and actually fix people's real problems while you're mitigating the effects on others. So I think actually the focus on numbers is kind of missing the point. What we need to be focusing on is how do you make sure that people are operating responsibly so you can deliver the good stuff. And I'm not gonna put a value judgment on whether people are using their internet correctly. It's not for us to do. There are definitely good use cases that are, look how much money all the governments around the world are spending on trying to deploy high-speed broadband. And all I ever hear is that our speeds are not actually fast enough. And so, yeah, I think what we need to be thinking about more is how are we using space responsibly? How are we maximizing utilization of space for things on the ground, not just services, not just broadband, but for space exploration, for astronomy. How are we maximizing it? How are we trying to come up with the right incentives for people to be operating responsibly and efficiently so that we can provide the goods that the good services that people want, while you're still allowing for space explorations, while you're still allowing for all these other things. I think it can be done. I don't think it needs to be zero sum. I don't think you have to say it's one or the other. I think we can have both. I think we can be good enough that we can have both services, both sides of it.
Please help me thank David for a very thoughtful